Great. I think with that note, we will get started. Thank you so much to those of you who are here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Just a couple kind of housekeeping notes before we begin. Given that this is a webinar, participant audio and video have been disabled, but please feel free to use the Q&A function to post questions or engage with the presentations in the chat as well. As you've probably been notified, this session is being recorded. We will share the recording via the INEE website and INEE communication channels after this event. And we do have closed captioning available in English. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide. Great. So just a brief welcome on behalf of INEE. We are really excited to build on a multi-part webinar series that we have co-hosted with the USAID Middle East Education Research Training and Support Program, which is implemented by Social Impact and FHI 360. The series is titled The 4 W's of Education and Emergencies Data. Who has what data? Where can I find it? And why is this so complicated? And it really seeks to provide hands-on practice for professionals to further their understanding of the types of data available in crisis contexts and how to access, interpret, and use that data. So this webinar will be speaking to data technologies in IE. And with that, I'm really happy to turn it over to our MEERS team who will be presenting today. So Mark Buttweiler, who is the M&E specialist at FHI 360, Tanya Smith-Sreen, who's the program officer at FHI, Rafael Contreras Gomez, research associate, and then myself helping out with hosting on the INEE side. My name is Sonia Anderson, and I coordinate our work on data and evidence. So with that, Tanya, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Sonia. And I think Mark is actually going to kick us off. So Mark.
Great, thank you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. As Sonia said, my name is Mark Buttweiler, an M&E specialist at FHI 360. I'm really excited today to present the results of our research done under the Middle East Education Research Training and Support Program, and particularly how we can use data technologies to improve some processes within education and emergencies. So a quick roadmap here. I'm going to provide some background on the research that we did, including discussing our methods. I'll then go over the findings, which includes a typology of data technologies in the education and emergency space, and some findings around general utility, cost, safety, and security. I'll provide some recommendations in the form of guiding principles for EIE practitioners. Rafael will then provide some recommendations for specific data processes, including data collection, data analysis, and data communication. And then we'll go over our second product through this research, which is a dashboard, and have some calls to contribute to our ongoing data collection. Before I begin, I just wanted to quickly share the fact that we have participants from around the world. This is just a choropleth of who showed up or who registered for this webinar. Just so you can see that we have a good global sample in some of the spaces where EIE issues are particularly salient. So a quick background to this study. So although the potential of technology to support the humanitarian sector is widely recognized, and the rapidly changing nature of emergency settings can really benefit from tools and platforms that are able to provide real-time information, there are a lot of challenges to the further incorporation of data technologies into the EIE space. First of all, technological innovations aren't necessarily keeping up with the environment that's rapidly changing. And while we've looked at ed tech's potential to deliver content in this space, there really is a lack of research on particularly using data technologies within the constraints that the EIE sector faces. So our goal of this paper was to create a typology of data technologies across the different processes of a data lifecycle, develop guiding principles throughout the life cycle, including principles for data collection, processing, and communication, and then curate a set of recommended practices. I just want to do a quick disclaimer here that the study does not focus on the use of technology for national education systems in crisis settings, which has been researched via parallel initiatives, although some of the findings of this paper may be useful for government actors. This paper instead is primarily focused on non-governmental education emergency practitioners, both large and small, at the global, local level. So I'm going to go over our methods. So the study team used an iterative framework to categorize and understand the technologies used in EIE settings. The team first identified existing tools used in the EIE context by searching both academic and gray literature for papers related to information and communications technology and data. So the desk review here was to confirm the knowledge gap regarding EIE data and technology. There were 90 articles we reviewed. We found 25 to be of particular relevance for our research study. We then conducted 35 semi-structured interviews, including questions on, of course, demographics, but then the types of technology used by the organization, the requirements for these technologies, advantages and disadvantages in terms of general utility and cost, and then the potential uses of these technologies in the future. The actual data analysis was iterative in nature, as data from each source was used to identify more sources and more individuals to interview. So just a quick overview of who we actually talked to. As I mentioned, we did 35 interviews. 94% or 33 of those respondents worked in education. They had an average of 14 years of experience in education, and 27 of them focused on education and emergencies with an average of 8 years of EIE experience. We saw 74% of the respondents at the global level, 37% national, 31% at the local, though someone might have multiple lenses of strategic focus. So that does not add up to 100%. 46% of the respondents worked in the Middle East, which is the focus of our study. 43% of the respondents were women, and you can see they were in humanitarian technology and nonprofit and UN organizations as the bottom right-hand graph. Okay. So the team identified these tools related to information and communications technology and data through this iterative analysis that I mentioned earlier. Through this analysis, we removed some tools such as MOOCs or learning management systems that were solely used for content delivery. But you can see we identified tools such as Voto Mobile, Twilio, ODK, Comcare, Apache, et cetera, et cetera. We began to group the tools that had similar underlying data technologies. So ODK and Comcare, for example, were both offline mobile surveys. And then we classified all of the identified tools within these technologies. We then grouped the technologies that serve similar purposes, right? So interactive voice response, offline mobile survey, these are mostly used for data collection. And then identified how the different techniques and technologies were generally falling into 3 buckets: data collection, data processing, and data communication. So data collection here is the process of capturing information on targeted variables. So as an example, during a phase of data collection, enumerators may collect results of a one-on-one assessment with students in a settlement, and then enter this data into a tablet via Kobo Collect. This data collection captures not only the main variables of interest, but also secondary information such as the location of the data collection and the amount of time spent on the assessment. This data may then be synced from a tablet to a server located on the cloud that only specific individuals within the organization has access to. So technologies in this process include offline mobile surveys, interactive voice response, remote sensing, social media, and SMS. And we define these technologies more thoroughly in the paper itself. Data processing is a broad category that includes validating, cleaning, exploratory data analysis, and modeling. So for this aforementioned data collection process, an analyst may take the data collected, append the data into a singular database using some sort of proprietary software such as Stata. They may then merge it with the previous data collection and analyze how much students learned or how much students grew on a cell measurement between baseline and endline. So some technologies that people may know in this process include data analysis software, machine learning techniques, computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, such as Deduce, and programming languages, such as Python or R. And then finally, data communication is the process of communicating this data back to stakeholders, primarily through written results and data visualization. So for that example that we were talking about before on our cell data collection, an analyst may develop a Sankey graph using Power BI to show how students' social and emotional skills have progressed across the year and show differential progress as it relates to different geographic locations. This is then presented to key stakeholders and impacts how resources are allocated in the next quarter. Technologies in this process include both dynamic and static data visualization. So this then became our analytical framework. When analyzing our data, it allowed us to tie insights on utility or requirements from specific tools, to underlying technologies and broader processes. So this technology mapping was a key result of our work, and I want to quickly share a page of the dashboard that we will be sharing later that provides a nice tabular overview of all of our results. As you can see, we identified a number of illustrative software. So you can see that we have, for example, using data, static visualization, we have a definition, visualization that captures a specific story of the data. We have some examples of use and some software, Adobe Illustrator, ArcGIS, Quantum GIS, Microsoft Excel. So there are a total of 42 unique technologies included in our database currently, which we will discuss further when we're sharing our dashboard. All right, I'm going to get into some of our findings. Through this typology, we identified advantages and disadvantages of individual technologies across general utility, safety and security, and cost. This includes advantages such as large increases in efficiency and data quality, potential increases in data security through the use of secure databases, and cost savings. There are also nuances to utility depending on the specific technology. So some data collection technologies, for example, using interactive voice response, will only reach those who have access to phones, which will result, of course, in survey bias. Similarly, there are security risks associated with using a tablet for data collection, particularly with respondents in EIE settings who have higher levels of wariness as it comes to surveillance. And these nuances are too detailed to list here, but Tanya will discuss this further in the paper's companion dashboard, which we will share in the second half of the presentation. So I wanted to go through some of our recommendations. First of all, the guiding principles developed through the iterative analysis of the data that we received during the interviews. First, we have some guiding principles that should be framework for all decisions when deciding whether or not to use a data technology. First, of course, is do no harm. Do no harm principles are the minimum standards of practice to avoid causing inadvertent harm. Decisions on what technologies are implemented need to be made within an understanding of the underlying context and how the technology interacts within that specific context. Second is a recommendation to follow GDPR and any related standards. So GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, protects data privacy and establishes rules around data sharing. There's also OCHA's data responsibility guidelines and the Humanitarian Data Science and Ethics Group's framework for the ethical use of advanced data science methods in the humanitarian sector, which are included as links within the paper that we'll be sharing. So the second set of principles is around when a specific technology is appropriate. First, we wanted to highlight that new technology does not mean better technology. Practitioners should not be focused on specific tools, especially as some tools may be sanctioned in EIE countries. Instead, the tools need to be designed with the local context, selected and designed with the local context in mind. Second is to coordinate among the stakeholders, adapting technologies using a systems thinking approach. Technology adaptation should move beyond project-based investments. Many activities in the EIE sector have a project-based approach that does not look at the education system as a whole or work toward cooperating within the national system. When governments have an existing system, the principle here is that the solutions should be built for that system and within that system. The third is to develop innovations in collaboration with local organizations and end users. Identifying technology centrally from headquarters to solve local issues continues to be a norm, but some of the most impressive uses of technology, such as the widespread adoption of WhatsApp and its role as a new data source, were initiatives led locally and organically. Of course, global actors have a role to play introducing new technologies and innovations that may have great potential but are not well known in local contexts. Local engagement almost always will be more conflict sensitive, more contextually appropriate, and will encourage local ownership of data, leading to greater use. And finally, if a technology has been selected, we have some guiding principles on how the adoption of that technology can be successful. First is introducing the new technology within a lens of social and behavior change. Second is looking at technology as a long-term investment, not solely in the cost for software development or license procurement, but also costs related to hiring the right staff to develop, maintain, and leverage insights from the deployment of a new technology, and costs related to staff capacity development and change management. And then finally is a recommendation to nurture a culture of data feedback loops and data-driven decision-making, particularly taking steps to get data back into the hands of stakeholders across the project. As we've seen, that data will be more powerful if it is closer to the hands of those who can use it. All right, I'm gonna do a quick poll just to see what the audience's experience with these principles have been. So you should see a poll showing up on your screen. Of these guiding principles, could you select the 3 that you have most regularly followed in your own practice? So this is a multiple selection response. So select the 3 that you've most regularly followed and the 3 that you have not used or have not been aware of. All right, so I'll give you a couple of minutes to fill out this poll. All right, I'll just give you 30 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the polling. So I'm not surprised to see that the guiding principle of do no harm. Let me share the results. Okay, thank you, Tanya. That the guiding principle of do no harm was broadly applied within your own practice. That is a key principle of EIE and humanitarian and development work in general. In terms of those that have not been aware of is introducing new technologies, social and behavior change. And I guess second here is coordinating among stakeholders, adopting technologies using a systems thinking approach. And so I think that shift of making sure we're looking at a new technological tool for data collection or processing or communication really does need to have a user-focused implementation to ensure that people are actually adopting the tool and using it successfully. All right, I'm going to pass now to Raphael, who's going to continue by discussing some of our recommended practices.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And I think for this section, what we have done is really try to organize a series of recommended practices that we gather from our study participants for all the different processes, right? So collection, processing, and communication. And we found it useful to divide these recommendations into strategic, so rather thinking big picture about the process itself, and operational, sort of getting into more the implementation details when it comes to actually being in that process. So if we start with data collection on the strategic side, we really have, first and foremost, start thinking about costs, but also about maintenance costs and sustainability of your data collection effort. So ask, how will this data collection effort be sustained moving forward? How much developing something like an app or specific software for your project costs, and how really it will transcend the life of a specific project, as we have seen, is often a defining feature of many projects in this sector. And especially if relevant, think about how linking this work to local infrastructure, right? By co-developing with local actors the sustainable mail systems that can then be transferred to government or other organizations. And really what we're trying to prevent here from the beginning is expensive one-off developments that then die when projects phase off, or projects that cannot be sustained over time. And then really consider coordination and data sharing in advance. So I think probably many of you are familiar with duplication in data collection efforts. So one project is collecting education data for one particular area, another project is collecting sanitation data, and these processes are time intensive and costly. So really, how can the data being collected be shared into existing data landscapes, and how can these data landscapes, sort of thinking about how the data that we're collecting, be brought into these spaces of communication. And for this, I think following guidance for global public goods in open infrastructures and other interoperability standards, and I think INEE has done some work on this as well. I think it really can be a good resource. And especially when we're preparing for data collection, or when a project has a massive data collection component, really thinking about the technological landscape. And we might have an idea of penetration rates for mobile or people with access to internet, but really asking questions about who's being included and who's being excluded when we choose a specific technology, and asking those questions up front can really improve the quality of the data that we control, and also making sure that we're including all the different range of populations that might be within our population of interest, and you really don't want to find out that you have excluded an entire subpopulation once the data collection processes are ongoing. And on the operational side, I think that as the results from the poll mentioned, and I think this will resonate with many of your experiences, I think our participants agree that duty of care is first and foremost, right? And this includes, of course, the safety of respondents and the populations that many of the projects work with, but also enumerators and all the other staff involved in data collection. And thinking about duty of care, it starts from going to IRB at local and international level, but also thinking about procedures to keep data safe during data collection. Applications used for data collection, such as Kobo, ODK, and many others, have options to encode the data and then be wiped out from local devices. We can also use row-level security to ensure that only people who really need to see the data can access it when appropriate. And in certain contexts, we will learn from participants in the study that certain organizations in the INEE space or in the IE space have procedures for device destruction. And I think it really thinks about being really purposeful about how, protecting those involved in data collection. And lastly, really thinking about deploying multiple modes of data collection, and how we can integrate different platforms to address potential safety issues and bring in inclusion of different populations. So we can imagine an organization that is trying to assess learning through an IVR, so an interactive audio response, that then complements this approach with a secondary arm of data collection that is more in person and include tablets to really reach those people with poor network access. So really, I think, mixing data collection modes when possible to reach as many people as possible. And on the data collection side, really ensuring that having clear surveys that are well designed, short, and familiar to the user, we really have higher response rates. So technology definitely makes it easier for us to add that one more question that we might really think that we need that extra question about a specific experience of participants, but really consider whether the data that you're asking will be looked at or even used for a specific purpose. So being really purposeful about data use when you're thinking about designing your surveys, and as much as possible, of course, deploying the survey so it is free and not a burden, financial or time-wise for respondents, will reap benefits in terms of the amount of people who complete the survey. And really, I think the last one is, or the last set is really about tailoring technological solutions to the environment in which it's being deployed. So being really mindful of things like regulations by local authorities. So in some settings, authorities might not allow, for instance, taking pictures of schools or learning centers for security reasons. So alternative methods such as satellite imagery or school environment surveys can really provide the data that we need without really sort of interfering or trying to present a challenge to local regulations and even what is allowed from a cultural standpoint in the settings where we work. So if we go to the next slide, please. Great. So when we're thinking about data processing and what we're doing with this data on the strategic level, I think we heard from participants in the study about this need to really invest in more analytical support. Right? So there's this tension between the lack of data and the lack of quality of data that often comes from the environments where EAE interventions work, and this also need to leverage expertise that is out there. So things like machine learning and other advanced data science techniques can have a potential to improve the quality that of the data and the things that we can do with the data available, but that cannot happen if that expertise is not purposefully brought into the EAE space. So I think one of the recommendations is, I think it's being bold in including profiles of people like data scientists and data managers and really bringing those roles to a more prominent position in the EAE space that has a lot of potential. And in here, really also on processing, obtaining clarity on which data must be shared at the beginning of the project. So you know what data or who's going to see the data and how that can be made anonymous and de-identified in the process of analyzing the data. So once that data is in your hands, then we continue to protect the identity of those involved, even when this is transmitted to donors and other concerned parties. And I think the third point on the strategic side of building capacities of staff to leverage data is, what we found is that we kind of have a push to bring more data scientists and to bring more innovative tools into the space if we don't couple that with an investment in also making sure that practitioners and management and people around the organization are and sort of embedded in the process of using these tools. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to create an algorithm that can help us improve the quality of our data if the assumptions behind those algorithms are not validated by people who really know the context and really know the space. So any attempt to bring better technology into data processing must be coupled with assumptions that are really relevant for the realities where we work. And lastly, I think building expertise in multiple platforms. So as Mark mentioned before, EAE is a shifting context when it comes to the availability of platforms. So we know that specific hardware providers might be sanctioned by certain donors, or certain licenses might not work in certain countries where EAE projects are ongoing. So being able to shift between platforms and to include or making sure that different platforms can be used for analysis are important to ensure that that data can continue to be processed in these settings. And on the operational side, using technology to ensure data is accurate and timely and automate data validation processes, I think it really sort of speaks for itself. And it's asking, are we using the technologies that we already have to the best of their potential and really improving from this point the quality that we can get. So things like high frequency checks and geolocation that are already really available, but are we really exploiting the potential of those to improve the data quality and to flag at the data collection stage what any issues that may arise. And the last two, it's really about sort of these best practices in what we do with the data once it's in our hands. So we're ensuring that any analysis is being able to be reproduced by someone else, or we keep in tidy code, and sort of like best practices in data management that can really sort of like improve the standards in which the sector continues to work with data. And lastly, really triangulating data sources. We hear a lot from our participants of the need to include both qualitative and quantitative data to really capture the reality of the populations with which we work, and that can be done by being creative in the type of data that we pull together to make sense of the data we collect. Next slide, please. And I think lastly on data communication. So Mark alluded to that a little bit about sort of this need for approaching the use of new tools and introducing new tools as a change management. So what we hear from our participants in the study is that users will not adopt a new tool in a vacuum, right? So getting a new number of tools and systems to talk to each other requires really bringing in people and making sure that they're sort of like brought up to speed on why exactly a new tool might be needed. How is it used? How is it different from what they already know? Because the risk otherwise is that they resort to what they really are familiar with, and that might be a spreadsheet software or something that we're trying to move away from necessarily to improve some processes. So when deploying new tools or ways to look at and use some data, a detailed change management approach is essential. And this is really tied to the need for data champions, right? And a culture of data-driven decision-making need to be built at the top to set expectations that using data in decision-making, and that has become this buzzword, right? But really that means that has to become the norm and not the exception. So one example at FHI is the AENN in Nigeria. It's the data hub model that FHI has worked with, where they have identified 4 different roles: data manager, IT support lead, data use advisor, to ensure that the deployment of new technologies had really local ownership in the project and local champions. And this really sort of matches or what other respondents have described as a successful adoption of new systems, having that local ownership that ensures that everyone is invested in a culture where data is looked at consistently as part of the project cycle. And as many of you are sort of like either in an M&E role or in a research role, and in the context of project, what does that mean for a culture of data sharing? So I think that the main recommendation here is that whenever you get a chance to share data, either internally or externally, do it. And that seems like an easy recommendation, but it also involves being thoughtful about different levels of data literacy and making sure that issues and insights from the data are communicated to teams across the board in a way that is sort of accessible to everyone, and that at the same time can help build a data literacy along the way. And because it doesn't make sense to keep the analysis to the donor or to a specific group of people within projects if that has the potential to become to become action items for everyone else in the team. And finally, on the operational side, providing data in a timely fashion to the appropriate stakeholders emerge as a clear recommendation. And that, of course, means sort of feedback loops directly to teachers to help improve their practice. It can mean aggregating data on students and teachers that can be shared with school leaders. And really that timeliness that we know technology can bring really has the potential to facilitate information sharing, but still does not happen on a consistent basis. So keeping that sharing of information in a timely and very purposeful manner is a key recommendation. And that is tied to follow data visualization best practices and reporting that is simple and it's really straight to the point. So I think making sure that graphs and everything that any output that is produced from data analysis is really boiled down to the essential parts: one-pagers, single visualizations, and really being innovative in the ways of reporting. So the data is really serving its purpose. And the last two really concerned about, well, we talked about row level security and how detailed they can be, but also being mindful of who has access to that information and who do we really want to be seeing all the data, and again, being aligned with the do not harm principle, using the row level or like row level security tools that are embedded in many of the technologies that we're already used to ensure that data is kept safe. And finally, ensuring that systems are maintained. If you have ever you look at a dashboard or any particular piece of tool or of technological tool, you know that if it's not updated constantly, people lose interest, and you want your users to make sure that to know that data is being updated regularly, and that the data is maintained. So people, you can sustain a data driven decision making culture with a data that is continually being updated, and that emerge as a key practice.
Great, thank you so much, Rafael. So while we were doing this study, we realized that there were some problems with the results that we were getting, particularly as it related to kind of curating all of these tools that could potentially be used. First of all, it's that the nuances of the technologies, of the specific technologies, are quite specific to that technology. But also that the tools themselves will change rapidly as technologies and norms change within the sector. We also found that cost and ease of use data is really hard to compare. It's, again, very dependent on the underlying technology. So the specific tool used and its hardware software requirements, the scale of the data collection all impacts whether or not the tool itself is costly to be used. So we had these problems that were kind of rearing their head throughout the analysis, and although we believe our recommended practices and our principles are certainly useful for the larger community, we also wanted to create a tool that lived beyond this paper. And so we developed a dashboard that had insights for specific technologies, and that also incorporated a feedback mechanism to crowdsource insights. We also wanted to make sure that this tool would allow us to add new tools as they are created. So I'm going to now switch over to sharing this dashboard. I'll quickly talk about some of the other insights that were uncovered through our research before handing it over to Tanya to discuss the specific tools and use case databases that we're hoping that you can contribute to. So I should now be sharing a dashboard. Can I just get a confirmation that the dashboard's?
Yep, it's up, Mark.
Great, thank you. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of insights about specific technologies that were too large to include in our paper. So within our dashboard, we have a page where you can examine insights by specific technologies. So this provides a way to zoom in on insights for, say, interactive voice response, the data collection technology. So if I wanted to look at interactive voice response, I'm curious in learning more about how this could be used within my data collection processes. First of all, I have a definition of what that technology is, but you can see advantages, disadvantages, requirements, and recommended practices particular to that specific technology. So we have this page that allows you to examine insights, which I hope that you can all explore at your own leisure after the call. But in the interest of time, I'm going to pass it to Tanya, who's going to talk about some of the crowdsourcing features of this dashboard. So Tanya, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Mark. So I'm just gonna request control of your screen so I can navigate around the dashboard. And yeah, first and foremost, as Mark mentioned, in the process of conducting this study, we realized that it was really important to develop an additional resource, which became this companion dashboard, to make the research findings that we had more easy to navigate and accessible to folks, and also really make sure that the insights at the technology level were available to people, and not just at that process level. So I'm going to actually share the link to the dashboard in the chat, because this is a resource that will live on after the project. and we want to make sure that folks have access to it. So we've partnered with the EdTech Hub to host the dashboard on their website. So that dashboard is available there now, and I just put the link into the chat. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the crowdsourcing pages within the dashboard. So as you'll see, the dashboard's title is Crowdsourcing Data Technologies for Education and Emergencies. And so we'd really like the dashboard to continue on as a living resource that is continued to be updated by folks working in this sector, people working in education and emergencies in the field, employing tools with real day-to-day experience applying these tools. And so I should have just navigated to the Find Tools page. Give me a thumbs up, Mark, if you can see it on your end too. Okay, great. And so you'll see here we have a tools database that provides a list of available tools that we've been able to catalog based on that technology typology that Mark previously presented. So the more that we kind of tested this dashboard out, tested this tool out, the more we heard from users that they really wanted a way to be able to find specific tools associated with those technologies that they could select for their use cases, right? So they wanted to be able to use the dashboard as kind of a decision-making tool. And so that's why we decided to develop this, this tool database that you see here. So we have these filters at the top of the page. We have currently 42 tools available on this tool database, and you can filter by technology, by tool, whether that tool can be used offline or online, and whether it's open source or not. So those are the ways we found most useful to kind of navigate through the information available here. So let's test one of these filters out. Let's filter by dynamic data visualization. All right. So now we should be seeing all the tools that we currently have included in the database for dynamic data visualization. So you can see we've changed from 42 to 5, and we also have some colors available here within the relative cost and relative ease of use columns. So as you saw previously, those columns were blank and most of them contained null. And why is that? That's because right now we don't have the data ranking that relative cost and relative ease of use. So as Mark mentioned previously, we found that this information was kind of difficult to gather just on our own as our research team. And so that's why we decided, you know what, a crowdsourcing tool would be the best way to design a dashboard like this, because then we can get that information from people actually making use of these tools. So right now we have some data available for Tableau, Google Data Studio, et cetera, from some of our colleagues as well as ourselves who've used these tools. But ideally, we'd like to use this space today to get your take on the tools that we have included here. But before that, we want to make sure that you all are able to kind of interpret the information that's here. So using the chat, I'd like to ask the participants on the call today. Looks like we switched back to the PowerPoint. There we are. All right. So using the chat, and you can also open this page on your own end as well, on your own browser using the link that I shared with you all. But we'd like to know what tool within the dynamic data visualization tools we have available here is relatively the most expensive. So which tool is relatively the most expensive? And you can pop your answer into the chat. And feel free to select all panelists and attendees so people can see your responses there. Okay. So we have a response from Suzanne, Tableau, and Salesforce. What does everybody else think? Anybody Yeah, so yeah, I'd agree, Tableau and Salesforce. Yeah, exactly. So those are ranked at 5, and as you can see with the color coding as well, those are the tools that are relatively the most expensive. All right, so how about the tools that are relatively the most easy to use, the easiest to use within the tools that we can see here? Which do you think are the easiest to use? I'll give you a couple of seconds to look at what we have available here. And take a look at the key. Okay, Salesforce. Google Data Studio. Yeah. Yeah, so Salesforce, based on the rankings here, yeah, would be the easiest to use. Google Data Studio would be kind of in between because it's ranked at 3 right now. But you can see Google Data Studio also has the most number of responses. So this is the median responses from the responses that we've received so far here. And so how did we receive those responses? If you take a look down at the bottom of the page at the key, you can see tools are ranked on relative cost and ease of use by users like you. So the null value indicates that no rankings have been submitted yet. And the way that you can submit a ranking is by selecting the survey down at the bottom of the page. So before we jump into that, I just want to remove the filter on this page. All right. So as I mentioned before, most of them right now have a null ranking and 0 number of responses. So I'd like everybody to just take a moment to scroll through the tools available on this database and think of a tool that you've used in the past. And once you find a tool, open up that survey. And Mark, maybe we can open up that survey on your browser as well. I think I can click it actually. Okay, there we go. So this survey will actually allow you to rate the tool based on exactly what we just looked at, the relative ease of use and the relative cost based on your experience. And so you would select a tool at the top of the page. Let's say I'm going to rank Microsoft Power BI because that's a tool that I have used in the past. I sometimes use this tool. Scrolling down, I mean, use it for data use and visualization. And while I'm showing this, feel free to open up the form on your own page and start rating a tool that you have used in the past. And this is based on my own experience, right? So I would say it's relatively more expensive. I'd say it's relatively more difficult. I found that Google Data Studio has been the easiest data visualization tool that I've used so far. So would highly recommend. And this dashboard is hosted on Google Data Studio. And if you'd like to be added to the mailing list, feel free to include your email down here. So I'll just add mine for now. And you can go ahead and submit that form once you're ready. All right. So I'm gonna refresh the data on my end as we're waiting for some more responses come in. Oh yeah, that's good. Put that survey into the chat.
I've also just added the link to the survey directly in the chat.
Okay, great. And feel free to let us know too which tool you're ranking in the chat. And maybe Mark, we can go ahead and refresh. Okay, great. So we have Shyama ranking Kobo now. What other tools are people ranking? All right, so we'll take maybe a minute more to continue submitting ratings. And maybe Mark, you can scroll through that database on your end. I'm not able to scroll down. Okay, great. Rating Tableau, Kobo. Okay, let's check out, I think Kobo, yeah, we've got some responses in there now. There we are. Okay. All right. So we've got 4 responses in total for Kobo so far, with a relative cost at 1.5 and ease of use at 1.5, right? And you can see with the color coding and the key below, that means it's relatively less expensive and relatively easier to use. How about we check out Tableau? I guess we have rankings for that one. Any other tools that people are ranking? Okay, so oh, Google Data Studio, nice. Glad to hear there's another Google Data Studio user out here. Yeah, that would be great. You can rank activity info as well. Yeah, the more tools you can rank, the better, because that means the more data we have in this dashboard and the more data everybody has to access around these tools. Okay, so I wanted to ask as well, is there a tool that you have used in the past that's not currently available in this database? And if so, you can visit the other Google form at the bottom of the page, which allows you to actually add a new tool into the database. So it'll ask you the name of that tool, add a short description. You can use or look at the descriptions already available here. As you can see, it's kind of just a line or two what that tool is used for. The technology, which is aligned with the technology typology produced from the paper, a URL for that tool, and then based on the filters at the top, whether it's open source or not, and whether it requires internet to use. So it's a fairly simple tool, and it allows us to gather additional, or it's a fairly simple form, and it allows us to gather additional tools that people are using in the field that others might not be aware of and might be useful for their context. Great. So our other crowdsourcing page that I just wanted to take a couple moments quickly to go over is this Find Use Cases page. And so as we were discussing this dashboard with people and sharing some of the findings from the paper, we realized that in addition to having tools available and like knowing what tools were available, people wanted to know how other organizations in this field had used those tools in action, right? Or used those technologies in action. And so we began cataloging different use cases by various organizations in the EIE space and development of how they've used technology for their programs. So right now we only have 21 use cases, but I'm almost positive that most people on this call have some use cases in mind that they might be able to contribute to this dashboard. So you can definitely browse through the use cases at your leisure. following the webinar, but there's also a form at the bottom of the dashboard, and maybe Mark can scroll down. I can't seem to scroll down. And just open up the form at the bottom of the page. Yeah, great. So exactly as we had that form, missing a tool in our database, we also have the form, missing a use case in our database, please add one here. And so you can add examples from your own experience or examples that you've heard of that you think are really useful for other people to, you know, have exposure to or to use to inform their own decision making, because we can all really learn from one another. At the end of the day, I think this dashboard does provide us kind of an opportunity to cultivate more of a community of practice around using technology for data collection, processing, and communication within the EIA space. And so with that, I think I can probably conclude this section. I know we're getting to the point where we're almost at the conclusion, right, of the webinar. So thanks all so much for contributing and for ranking, and we encourage you to continue rating tools, continue adding tools that you have experience with, as well as those use cases, because I think we could all really benefit from sharing each other's information or sharing each other's experiences with technology. And I know we have a couple questions in the Q&A that have been answered so far, but maybe I'll give a chance to talk about the capacity building of staff, since we have INEE on the line. There's a question related to building capacity of staff. Does INEE or other actors have courses available?
Yeah, I shared a response to that. We don't currently have courses available, but I think, you know, given the movement, as you said, Kira, towards increasingly using digital solutions, it would be quite relevant. But I'm happy if the other panelists have any courses or resources that they want to share in the next few minutes. But it's definitely something that we could work towards with our members in the future.
Thanks so much, Sonia. Yeah, and I think we have this one other question about moving from data to info to communication. Can we talk about the meaning of the info that we want to communicate? I know we looked into a lot of this during the development of the paper. So maybe, Mark, I don't know if there's anything you want to touch on that from the question from Kurt Rhodes right before we conclude.
Yeah, thank you. So of course, this is really project dependent and program dependent, what kind of info we're communicating through these data visual softwares, but that also drives the type of tool that you would want to be using. So if I give an example of one of the projects the EIE projects that I'm working on in Northeast Nigeria under the AIN project, we are, collecting information on both regular school metrics like teacher and learner attendance that we're communicating through dashboards to help identify specific outliers that need particular support. And we're also collecting early warning signs related to the conflicts happening in Northeast Nigeria, which helps support our complexity-aware monitoring system by identifying where specific incidents are happening in specific communities and what our response is for those said communities. So I think this is really, again, dependent on the project, but the visualization itself and being able to hold conversations that are data driven has been kind of one of the most important aspects of the project, because of the changing dynamics of working in education emergencies and the need for new data to have both strategic and operational conversations. I just wanted to end today by thanking everyone and reminding you that in the dashboard link that we sent out, there will be a link to the paper. We'll send out a paper to everyone that was in the webinar as well. and to please check out the dashboard and contribute to our resource. We're really looking forward to seeing how we can move this forward as a resource for the community. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everyone. As noted in the chat, the information and presentation from this webinar, as well as the recording, will be shared via INEE. We're really thrilled that you joined today and hope that you are able to continue engaging with the dashboard. And just a huge thanks as well to our panelists, to Mark and Tanya and Raphael, for sharing this study as well as the dashboard. And with that, I think we will close. Just 1 minute over.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.